everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, technical issues sorted. Did you switch it off and back on again, Curtis?
Yeah, I think I'm all ready and good to go. Fingers are definitely crossed here.
Yeah. IT specialist first default. Have you switched it on, off and on again? Yeah.
Yeah. I've kicked it. I almost threw it out the window. And just if anyone's curious, we've just recorded an interview with Derren Martin, and I had to bail out of it because I had no audio.
It was
me.
So that if you haven't listened to the midweek interview with Derren Martin, then that is what we are referring to. So welcome back then, Curtis, as we were hoping at the end of the interview there with Derren that you would have the technical issues sorted out. But so this week we've had the FN50 event going down in London with Fleet News, but we have a big event coming up next week, don't we, Curtis? And that's
we do indeed.
Hopefully grabbing a coffee together, and with Stephen Whitton as well, hopefully.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy coffee journey, that one, isn't it? Multiple coffees, I think. So we're talking about AM Live, which it's been a long way off for a long time, and then suddenly it's next week. So it's Thursday next week, 9th of November. And I was looking at the exhibitors and some of the speakers. There's actually over 50 exhibitors attending. There's some really good speaker sessions lined up, covering sales, after sales, digital and strategy. And some of those speakers include Eddie Hawthorne from Arnold Clark, Nigel Hurley from CarShop, Kim Costello from Pendragon, Ewan Cameron from Peter Vardy Group, Steve Young, friend of the pod from ICDP, Liam Finney from EMAC, and Owen Edwards from Grant Thornton. So good lineup of speakers, and there are actually quite a few more than that, and covering those four key areas. So I think that's going to be quite an interesting part of the event.
Definitely. And as we briefly mentioned earlier, if you've not had a chance yet, then it's on your podcast feed from earlier on this week. That standalone interview there, as always, with Derren Martin from Cap HPI, who talked us through October's 4.2% drop in used car values, which is the biggest month-on-month drop for some years now, and how this impacted trends around the age, fuel type and sectors. Plus, he does share his view as to what to expect as we move into sort of November, December, towards the end of the year, and into January, into the new year there. But following this quick sort of shout-outs this morning, then we will be playing a brief extract from that interview, just so give you a flavour of what Derren has been sharing this month for the value movements.
And coming up in the following week, we'll have a special interview with John, Peter and David Smythe, co-directors of Swansway. It's actually a fascinating chat, because it started with them talking about their 20th anniversary celebrations, but it evolved and started to cover their views on current new and used trading, Q4 and beyond, EVs, and of course agency. So that will be on your podcast feed from Wednesday. So do look out for that. All the three brothers were on absolute top form. That was a good fun one to record, wasn't it, Phil?
It was, and I've intentionally not edited, so it is as it is. So do apologise in advance. But it was the three brothers were in three separate locations, and Curtis and I are obviously north and south as well. So it was a fascinating, great chat with those guys on their business. So that'll be on your podcast feed from Wednesday of this week.
Yeah, they said it couldn't be done, but somehow we managed to pull it off.
Yeah, just about, I think. Yeah, just about.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
So headlines this week are from Motor Finance, Car Dealer, Automotive News Europe and Insider Media. Starting in a minute with Cap HPI reporting on that 4.2% drop in October's used car values. We'll have an extract from the interview that Phil did with Derren Martin. And staying with October, we'll have a look at used car stock levels enjoying a part exchange boost as prices and demand stabilise, according to eBay Motors Group's latest market view. We've got the latest on the impact of the cost of living crisis on used car finance trends, with separate reports from AA Finance and Close Brothers Finance reporting on how buyers are taking out smaller and more affordable loans. Virtue Motors has strengthened its position in the Southwest with another acquisition coming less than 12 months after buying the Helston Garage Group, its biggest purchase to date, and why Stellantis is adding a 15th brand to its portfolio.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
Derren, I think this interview is probably, more valued than ever in terms of some of the context. So we've obviously had a headline trade value at 3 years, 60,000 miles at down minus 4.2%, which is equivalent to approximately £850 downwards, which is the biggest monthly drop since the introduction of Cap Live back in 2012. Do you want to talk us through sort of how the month played out and some context behind that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's actually the biggest movement. Yeah, since we introduced Live in 2012, you've got to go back to 2011 May, I think, for a movement this large in the market. We've obviously been seeing values dropping over the course of sort of since April time. So we've had over the July, August, and September values dropped by around 2% each month there. And then as we've gone into October, it started off sort of in a similar vein to that, but then the value movement's just increased. And we're basing our values off what we see in the sold data generally. We do also reference retail data, but it's important that to sort of say that the value movements that we're making are based off the data that we're seeing in the trade market. So there are vendors that are selling for obviously less, pretty much across the board actually. We're speaking to retailers, and context behind that is that retailers are not, the demand has dropped off fairly considerably for some. I think the necessity purchase is still there. Obviously in the used car market, that's a bit of a constant, but those aspirational purchases, cars that are sort of a higher value, are struggling by more. And I guess the vendors are selling the cars now, whereas in the past when the market started to drop, maybe they were hanging on to cars a little bit longer, hoping that there'd be a recovery. But I think the way they're seeing it at the moment, there isn't likely to be a recovery in the short term as we're entering that sort of seasonal drag. So values are dropping. You've got a bit of a double whammy of seasonality and then demand dropping through cost of living concerns, people getting mortgages that are coming to an end, fixed rate mortgages coming to an end, interest rates are high, looking at winter fuel bills, all of those sorts of things all playing a part now into this sort of fairly major realignment in values.
And it's obviously, the biggest, they say, in terms of that October into November movement. But through history, there's been some big movements, particularly in that financial crash period, wasn't there, when you start to look over a period of time, that you were seeing these kind of figures fairly consistently, weren't you, through that period?
Yeah, we've seen it before, but you've got to go back a long way to see those sorts of movements. There is no escaping. This is a large movement in the month. Since we introduced Live, we've only had a movement of over 3% on 3 occasions. So it is quite rare, and we've obviously gone for over 4% this time. So we've not seen this in the sort of the Live era, I guess, as we call it. Then you do have to go back to 2011, and then before that to 2008 for a movement this much. But the big caveat on it this time around is that values are high. Values went up in 2021. They were very stable in 2022. Some cars went up in value again in 2022. if you look at average values are still around 18, 19, 20% above where they were in 2021 at the start of that year. So cars are still worth more than then. I think that's an important point, that the vendors selling cars now can afford to do it at slightly lower amounts because they put those cars on before, a lot of those cars on before those huge increases. So they're still worth a lot more than than their residual values that they were planning for.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
Coming from Motor Finance Online, and this is used car stock levels enjoy part exchange boost as prices and demand stabilise. And this is used EV volumes increased by 53% year on year. This is according to the market view there from eBay Motors Group. So as always, some very insightful stats and performance figures is shared by eBay on the market.
Yeah, probably worth starting with some of those stocking trends. So average dealer inventories increased 3% for the month to 48 units. And that actually equals July as the highest level for the year so far, and 4% higher than they were 12 months ago. And eBay Motors Group goes on to say, trade-ins following the debut of the new 73 plates in September saw franchise sites actually benefit from a 6% month-on-month increase from 53 to 56 units. Meanwhile, independent stocks improved slightly from 36 to 37 units, although car supermarkets were actually down from 300 to 295, having peaked as high as 344 in July. But improved supply that we're talking about, saw greater numbers of EVs being sold by dealers on the motors.co.uk platform, with volumes up 9% month on month and 53% year on year, although overall they accounted for just 3% of all listings. So a bit of context there, moving in the right direction, but coming from a low base.
Yeah, and prices remain stable. Prices in October, the report that remain just £9 up on September, moving up to £17,524 on average, and that's marked the smallest monthly movement of the year so far, and saying that prices are tracking at 3% higher than the same period 12 months ago, and days to sell again remained fairly unchanged month on month at 36 days for car supermarkets. Actually, they have slightly ahead of the overall average at 27 days. So it seems like a fairly flat market within the dealers in terms of days to sell and average pricing month on month.
Yeah, definitely. And interesting comment from Lucy Tugby, marketing director at eBay Motors Group. It says the flow of part exchanges, including desirable end of contract fleet and PCP vehicles into the used car market, gathered momentum in October following a strong start to the 73 plate. And she went on to say, this is welcome news for dealers who have been working their way through this year's supply challenges. EVs are playing an ever-increasing role in the used car market as dealers take advantage of lower wholesale values and retail them at prices that are more affordable for used car buyers.
Yeah. So sticking with used cars and back over to Car Dealer magazine, and it's used car choices narrowing for people as loan values fall. And this is some research by AA Car Finance. They're saying that drivers are borrowing 5% less for used cars as the cost of living crisis bites, and that the average finance per vehicle has fallen from 13,239 to 12,532, and that the Mocha, the Duke, and the Focus now out of reach for motorists needing average loan to value for the whole vehicle. So some interesting findings this that relate back to that cost of ownership, and the US have been reporting recently about that credit availability being a challenge over in the US market.
Yeah, definitely, and it is interesting, as you point out, that they've looked at January to August year on year and seen a 5% drop. But also over that period, they've seen that loan periods have actually dipped from 57.1 months to 54.5 months. But the average monthly payments have only dropped by £2 from £232 to £230. And I'm assuming that this is the impact of higher APRs, higher interest rates.
Yeah, definitely. So I think they've also done a nice little top 10. It feels a while since you've done a top 10, Curtis. I can't remember the last top 10 you did, but they've done a top 10, haven't they, in terms of the change in prices of the 10 most popular used cars.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll give you the top 10, Phil. I know what you were alluding to. So number 10 was the Toyota Yaris. So average prices in Q3 of 14,388. Then it goes on to number 9, the Nissan Qashqai. Number 8, Nissan Duke. Number 7, the Vauxhall Mokka. Number 6, the Volkswagen Polo. Number 5, the Ford Focus. Number 4, the Ford Fiesta. Number 3, the Vauxhall Corsa. Number 2, the Fiat 500. And at number 1, the Vauxhall Astra, with average prices in Q3 last year of 8,694, rising to £8,889 in Q3 this year. And that's an average price change of plus 2.2%.
Yeah, so again, slightly different story this week, and going back over to Motor Finance Online. And I like the title on this one, Curtis. Consumers reversing on car buying plans, and saying that less than 2 in 5, 38% of dealers reported that customers are buying a car in the same way they would have done 12 months ago. And this is research by Close Brothers, and again talking that consumers are continuing to change their car buying plans because of the cost of living crisis, and that's according to their latest foresight research.
Yeah, and some interesting findings here, because more than 6 in 10 car dealers stated customers are looking to buy older vehicles in a bid to lower costs, and this is something we've talked about in other stories. So this is just further evidence in this ongoing trend to buy older and cheaper vehicles. And more than half of the dealers survey agree that customers are buying smaller vehicles. And it goes on to say that around 3 in 5 dealers have noticed customers are cutting back on the number of cars per household. However, those who are still planning to buy are sacrificing extras in order to minimize the cost, according to nearly 60% of dealers. So that does tie in very neatly with some of the findings in that previous story from AA Car Finance.
Yeah, and Lisa Watson, who's the director of sales there at Close Brothers Finance, said that given the well-documented pressures currently facing consumers, it's no surprise that many are having to adapt their plans to ease the cost of buying and running vehicles, and that the recent ULEZ expansion in London and similar plans likely to follow in other regions, coupled with the pushback of the ban on new and diesel and petrol vehicles, will only add to the uncertainty for buyers. So again, so we're starting to get some interesting findings on some of the changes around consumer behaviours and the automotive sector, particularly around that ownership and cost of ownership of cars.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed.
So next headline is from Insider Media, which I think may well be a first on the pod. This actually, yeah, it is a welcome debut. This story actually broke today as we recorded, and it is actually probably the best roundup of the deal, because it was covered elsewhere in the press, but there's been certainly more prominence given to it by Insider Media. So this is Virtue Motors snaps up long-standing dealership group, and this is Row Garages Limited, based in Plymouth, down in Devon, and it's in terms of acquisitions for Virtue, it fits perfectly with the acquisition they made December last year of Helston Garages, which, as I said at the top of the show, was their biggest acquisition to date. So this consolidates their representation in the Southwest, because I think it gives them a total of 34 sites, and it further strengthens their representation with Honda, bringing it up to 17 sites, which they're already the biggest Honda partner in the UK, but even more so now. So the three sites in question, Plymouth, Plymstock and Truro, are all Honda sites. And there's also a Suzuki site in Plymouth. But interestingly, the Suzuki site will continue to operate as a used car outlet and a Suzuki authorized repairer. But in the announcement that Virtue made to the stock exchange, it said that it will be refranchised in due course.
Yeah, and I know Robert listens to the podcast religiously, and if there was any doubt, Robert, that you are the UK's largest Honda partner, which I'm not sure we led any doubt in that, and we were corrected that you are. This certainly was confirmed now with this deal. I hope you didn't buy it just on the assumption that you weren't probably the largest UK Honda representative partner. But I mean, it's a fantastic acquisition. I think further across that south coast there, from what I believe it's a very good, well-run business down there, and obviously particularly following the Helston acquisition, just keeps moving that geographic coverage for yourself at Virtue. So I mean, fantastic acquisition there for Virtue. And I think it's quite interesting as well that was it was hidden in some of the other stories, wasn't it, that been hit this week for Virtue, because somebody's had a little bit of time on their hand and been playing around on Company's House, haven't they, Curtis?
That they have indeed. Yeah, it was picked up by a couple of the trade publications. Someone had somehow got into the Company's House listings or settings online and added a few directors who shouldn't have been added. So makes you wonder how it can be done, and it also makes you wonder who's got time on their hands to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a shame really, because it did take away from the announcement of the acquisition in some of the media in terms of what has gone on there. But I think hope it's not had too much of a fundamental impact on the business, and it's all resolved now. So yeah, we'll look forward to getting you back on at some point, Robert, because I think last time we spoke, it was you were on with a lot of things. I think you alluded that there was further expansion. So at some point we will have a catch up.
Yeah, he did actually mention about acquisitions in the pipeline, so this is clearly one of them. And as you said, Row's very well established and well-regarded business in the Southwest, and the business itself has a £30 million turnover, operating profit of £745,000, and the deal itself is worth just over £6 million.
So over to Automotive News Europe, and if Stellantis didn't have enough brands within their family of 14, they've had another one, and a deal that has been done with Leap Motor, and that is that Stellantis have added a 15th brand to sell low-cost EVs. And this is a deal that Europe will be the first market to get the Chinese-built Leap Motor EVs. sold by a new Dutch-based joint venture. So the JV also includes an option to build in Europe to avoid the potential tariffs, obviously from the EU tariff deal around the rules of origin and the tariff agreement there that's trying to play out over there in Europe. So, I mean, it's an interesting one, this one, isn't it? Because we know that, Stellantis have been part of the conversations in Europe trying to apply tariffs to Chinese brands entering Europe to try and slow down that growth. And at the same time, Stellantis have been trying to get into the Chinese market. But this is quite an interesting partnership. It's definitely a different kind of partnership that's sort of come out with this one.
Yeah, it's quite a canny move from Stellantis, although I would question whether or not they actually need a 15th brand under their umbrella. And it also means that you and I and everyone else have got to factor in another new brand, as though there aren't a lot to remember and factor in at the moment. We add Leap Motor to that long list. The deal itself is very much an international collaboration here. So the joint venture will see Stellantis looking after all markets for Leap Motor outside of China, and it seems to be a pragmatic way of addressing the introduction of what is effectively a budget EV brand into Europe. And Stellantis obviously very well positioned to do that, although one wonders how receptive Stellantis dealers will be to having another brand to consider. That one's got to play out a bit, I think.
Yeah, and this is Stellantis are going to invest 1.5 billion euros to acquire 20% equity stake in Leap Motors' parent company, and that the two companies will set up a Dutch-based joint venture called Leap Motor International, and it will be controlled by Stellantis, which will have a 51% stake, and that the joint venture targets 500,000 sales outside of China by 2030. And that's according to the Stellantis third quarter results presentation that came out this week. And that they also said that Leap Motor aims to sell 1 million units annually in China in the long term, and that Leap Motors have delivered about 111,000 NEVs units in China in the year of 2022. So some clear volume aspirations there from Leap Motors, and adding to that, like you say, that Stellantis representation outside of China across Europe there, and moving them into that EV space very quickly and in some volume, looking at that volume aspiration growth.
Yeah, and within the piece, it does say that Stellantis has been looking at ways to reduce the high cost of EVs, with CEO Carlos Tavares saying that producing a battery electric vehicle cost about 40% more than corresponding internal combustion models. So if Stellantis are looking at introducing a budget brand, it seems to make a lot of sense to partner with another manufacturer rather than trying to do it in-house themselves.
Definitely. And there is a bit more detail, because this, they said earlier on that this is following their announcement, their publication of performance this week that they've put out. And there's a bit more detail in here, because they do talk about EV growth within the Stellantis brand, saying that the BEV sales globally have grown by 37% in the third quarter. And that was mainly being driven by the Jeep Avenger battery electric small SUV, and the higher light commercial vehicle led by the Citroen Berlingo, or e-Berlingo, get that right. So, they've obviously clearly got focus on that EV market and showing some significant growth for the brand across that sector. So some great detail in this report by Automotive News Europe. And like you say, it'll be interesting to see what happens this, because, competing against the BYDs, the Teslas, Neos, Pangs, and other new entrants, particularly across that European market.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's it for this week. Hopefully, we've covered quite a few stories there. And as I said right at the start, do please try and catch up with the interview with Derren Martin. On that interview, he does mention the webinar that they've got coming up this Tuesday, which is free for anybody to attend, and they'll go into a lot more detail around the market from Cap HPI's perspective. And as Curtis said right at the start in the shout outs, do stay tuned for the fascinating, if not challenging, interview with the Smythe brothers, and that's John, Peter and David, that really tested our skills on interviewing there, Curtis, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We were doing it pretty much blind, weren't we? But it is worth listening to. As I said initially, they were talking about the 20th anniversary, but it's much more than that. So some great insights from them. But that's all we've got time for now. Many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. We're back on Wednesday with that interview with Swansway. We'll also be at AM Live, so do look out for us there and stop by, say hello. But until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
You've been listening to Motor Trade Radio Podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. We'll be sharing all the links from this week's headlines on Monday morning. So to make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.